involved with accusations of economic crimes. Liu Xiaoyuan said it's possible that Ai is accused of tax-related crimes. Mainland legal expert Ong Yu Kim said economic crimes cover a wide range of offenses such as insider trading and fraud. He added penalties for such crimes could be life imprisonment or the death penalty. Meanwhile, mainland melamine-tainted milk campaigner Zhao Lianhai said on Twitter today that fighting against the government is often a painful experience. With the current critical situation, Zhao added, expressions of anger might lead to a breakdown in negotiations with the authorities. Zhao was sentenced to jail for inciting social disorder but later freed on medical parole. He was taken away from his home by authorities yesterday afternoon after posting a video on YouTube and messages on Twitter calling on the government to free Ai Weiwei. He was allowed to go home last night. Ming Lam, TVB News.
Mainland and Constitutional Affairs Secretary Stephen Lam had heart surgery today. It's expected he can return to work tomorrow. Lam said he suffered occasional pain in his heart, and a medical check found one of his blood vessels was seriously blocked. He's now in good condition after undergoing coronary angioplasty this morning. A number of senior officials have had surgery in recent years. The head of the Central Policy Unit, Lau Siu Kai, had preventive surgery just last week. The Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, Rita Lau, has been on sick leave since last month after undergoing surgery to treat intestinal cancer. In 2009, Financial Secretary John Tsang also had heart surgery. In other news, engineers are scrambling to prevent another hydrogen explosion at the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant by pumping nitrogen gas into a reactor there. Meanwhile, efforts are continuing to prevent the level of contaminated water from rising inside the plant. Accepting the fact that radiation problems are not improving, the Japanese government is now considering expanding its nuclear evacuation zone to better protect the people.
The pumping of nitrogen gas is aimed at preventing hydrogen from exploding inside the containment vessel of reactor number 1.
The injection of gas is moving on smoothly.
Fuel rods inside the number 1 reactor are nearly half exposed because the coolant water level is low. It is believed that the overheated rods caused a buildup of volatile mix of hydrogen and oxygen, which could result in an explosion. But nitrogen reduces that possibility. Workers will conduct the nitrogen injection process for 6 days. Once successful, TEPCO will do the same for reactors number 2 and 3. In an entirely separate problem, TEPCO says the level of highly radioactive water has risen 5 centimeters in the underground tunnel connected to reactor number 2. They are monitoring the problem closely, but hope to avoid hampering the cooling system restoration work. TEPCO will also continue to release 8,000 tons of low-level radioactive water into the sea to make room for more highly contaminated water to be properly stored. They have so far discharged 6,000 tons of the contaminated water into the sea. With little progress being made, the government is warning the masses living within the 20 to 30 kilometers of the Fukushima plant that they may be ordered to evacuate even further.
Our current standards for evacuation are based on a scenario where massive amounts of radioactive materials are released in a short period of time. There are areas where radioactive substances have accumulated. The Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency will look into how to deal with these areas.
The Fukushima disaster has released traces of iodine in the air all over the world. While a United Nations scientific body says the radiation fallout is not expected to have any serious impact on people's health, the International Atomic Energy Agency says otherwise. The IAEA is expressing deep concern over Japan's decision to dump radioactive water into the sea. Back at the Fukushima plant, TEPCO vowed it will scrap at least 4 reactors once they are under control, but also admitted the process could take years or even decades.
Traces of radioactive iodine have been found in spinach on the mainland. Here in Hong Kong, officials say a small amount of radiation from Japan was detected in the air yesterday, but there is no cause for concern. Philippa Stewart reports.
A small trace of radioactive iodine was found in spinach planted in open fields in Beijing, Tianjin and Hunan province. But the amount was well below the mainland's safety limit. To put things into perspective, to absorb the same amount of radiation that you would get from a CAT scan, you would have to eat 2,200 kilos of the contaminated spinach. The mainland's director of the Institution of Radiation Safety, Xu Shu, said the iodine is likely to have come from rain that has absorbed radioactive materials in the air. He added that many countries use spinach to detect radiation because the flossy surface of the leaf easily absorbs radioactive materials. Here in Hong Kong, radioactive iodine was detected in the air yesterday after wind blew it in from Japan. But the observatory says it was a minute amount.
When you breathe it for 650 years, that will correspond to the dose of taking one X-ray. So it's really low and will not affect people's health.
But with the levels of radiation coming out of Japan still a concern for people, the observatory said it would continue to monitor the situation for now. Philippa Stewart, TVB News.
Overseas again, and NATO has come under renewed criticism from rebel leaders in Libya for failing to provide enough protection for civilians and of being slow to react. The criticism comes as the front line appears to have stabilized, and Muammar Gaddafi appealed directly to US President Barack Obama to use his influence to end the war. And rebels today claim a NATO airstrike killed a number of their fighters near the town of Brega, forcing a temporary retreat. The rebels first voiced criticism of NATO on Tuesday when their military commander said the Western alliance didn't do anything, even though they'd been given a mandate from the United Nations to act. And now the political leadership has weighed in, saying NATO has failed to protect the besieged citizens of Misrata in western Libya. Vice Chairman of the Libyan National Provincial Council, Abdel Goga, said since NATO took leadership of enforcing UN Resolution 1973, there's been a discernible slowdown in the number of airstrikes, and the people of Misrata were suffering as a result. NATO has rejected the criticism. A commander said the number of airstrikes is actually increasing every day, including attacks on Tuesday that destroyed a substantial number of heavy vehicles and tanks in Misrata that were threatening the civilian population. But he added the use of human shields by Gaddafi's regime was a limiting factor in how NATO pilots could respond in certain situations.
But trying to protect human shields when there's a tank with dozens of people round about it, of innocent civilians, the best thing at that stage is probably not to drop a bomb on the tank.
The front line has now apparently stabilized between the towns of Brega and Ajdabia, 200 kilometers from the rebel stronghold of Benghazi. Neither side has made any significant gains in recent days, and fighting has shifted to smaller objectives, such as control of the crucial oil port of Brega. Meanwhile, Gaddafi appealed directly to US President Barack Obama to halt what the Libyan leader called an unjust war. He also wished Obama good luck in his bid for re-election next year. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton dismissed the letter and said Gaddafi knows what he needs to do: step down and leave Libya.
And the sooner that occurs and the bloodshed ends, the better it will be for everyone.
Ivory Coast fighting continues to rage around the presidential palace in Abidjan. Forces loyal to presidential claimant Alassane Ouattara have launched fresh attacks to dislodge incumbent Laurent Gbagbo, who's refused to cede power after losing November elections. With the security situation in Abidjan deteriorating rapidly, French forces destroyed military vehicles belonging to troops loyal to Gbagbo during a helicopter-borne mission to rescue Japan's ambassador this morning. Israel has now asked France for help in evacuating its diplomatic staff. Ouattara troops tried to storm Gbagbo's residence yesterday, but were forced back by heavy weapons fire. Spain's finance minister said the country won't be next in line for a bailout after Portugal became the third European.